Vi ser här grönt och skönt kan man säga. Vår igen utan tvekan, för det växer och det gör det egentligen bara på våren. Mycket märkligt men trevligt samtidigt på något sätt, visst. Ja, ska vi se här. Vi kan få lite stabilitet här på våran tripod. Oj. Jag tänkte börja med ett citat här utav Erwin Schrödinger. Och jag vill först och främst hälsa naturligtvis som vanligt alla hjärtligt välkomna till H609. Och en relativt god dag kan man väl säga väderleksmässigt. Ömsom sol, ömsom regn. Det är väl perfekt för grödor om inte annat, men också trevligt för ögat att se hur skyarna skiftar och förändras. Det påminner mig hela tiden att intressera mig för skyn. Det är ju det som vi har runt omkring oss som är egentligen det enda som är snabbt föränderligt. Det är ju just himlen. Och det är fascinerande hur den moderna människan nästan alltid glömmer himlen och inte känner till den. Den är som en slags icke-väsen. Det finns folk idag som inte kan skilja mellan mörka gott vädersmoln och regnmoln. Det är samma sak. Så fort det är någonting mörkt så är det regn på gång. Och vi behöver nog ha lite mer intresse för världen än så. Eller behöver kanske ett fel ord, för att intention är det som byggde allting. Och intentionen finns nog där inne. Och jag är rätt övertygad om att den kan tas fram igen. Och därtill har vi ju detta fantastiska som är kvantfysiken. Jag börjar med Erwin Schrödinger. I am God. Jag är skaparen. Och jag går här över till engelska för att underlätta intränandet av engelska och också de som är på andra sidan Atlanten och lyssnar på detta. I am God, said Schrödinger, and I don't think the quantum scientist meant anything blasphemous in that. I think it was a return to how we used to perceive reality. That being in reality is creating reality. Being in reality is understanding that what I create is what I see. And that makes it objective, real, tangible, material, and all those things. And without an intention from me, nothing would be real, and nothing could be objective, shared, because it's the intention that is what it is to be shared. You have a common purpose. A little bit like building a house together, something you do in common. Therefore, you have some sort of objective reality. And objective means goal in English. That's the original meaning of objective. It's purpose. Nothing without a purpose can be objective. It's always something arbitrarily haphazardous. Simply chance. I can start with mentioning a real example from reality which I experienced just the other day. I have presently problems with a business I'm trying to fix, and I asked a friend to cross his fingers for me. And I got a really weird response. Yes, I can do it, but it wouldn't make any difference. For the first, it's mildly negative, not a nice thing to say. But secondly, it is against what we know in science. And of course, this is the old, dogmatic, sectarian classical physics that's talking. And albeit this person should have known better, he is, or she is, well informed what quantum physics is. But just the sheer immensity of classical physics today is what I think makes people surrender to what they think is too big to not be true, too shared to not be true. And yes, I completely agree. We share classical physics in every cell of our bodies. There's no doubt about that. The way we move has changed radically since the event of classical physics. We don't move the same way. And if we don't even move in the same way, we move in a classical physical way, of course that's going to have a tremendous effect. Because embodiment is what is true, in a way. It's true for him. It did not in his case matter that he, in his head and in his mental capacity, know quantum physics to be real. His body had another agenda. And this is this habituated classical physics that is so ingrained in our beings today, and in our language, and in our dealings with other people. That does not, however, mean that we try to use classical physics when we do things. There's no classical physical way of doing things. But there is a lot of not doing things and calling that classical physics. Because classical physics is just being passive. It's saying no to reality. It's stopping perception, meant in a completely literal way. When you're being classically, physical, you will stop perception of reality. That's the only way to maintain the idea of an absolute space, absolute time, absolute scale, and so forth. There's nothing in reality that can confirm that. It's not coming from reality. It's a closed loop. It's a little bit like the Swedish saying, goddag yxskaft. Very hard to translate. But it means that you get that sort of response you ask for. How you formulate the question will decide what answer you get. And classical physics is a tautology. It is self-confirming. It does not rely on observance. But what do we know? Well, what we do know is the saying of Schrödinger. We create reality in every instance by our own intention, by our observation, by our collapsing of the hyperposition, what is undecided. When we look at an ambigram, when we look at the hare duck, for instance, we will decide what it is. And this goes with the whole of reality. Our zoom, what we are having as an attitude, will decide what we see. And do we not acknowledge intention as the substance of the world? It's actually that makes the hyperposition collapse. So it can be material, it can be mental. Then we put our foot down and said, I don't give a damn about reality. I don't care about physics. I will stay in my self-confirming fantasy. I will remain there until that day I choose to leave it. So of course classical physics, while denying that intention has any effect on the world, it is actually started by intention. The idea that reality is wrong, and absolute space and absolute time is right. So going back to one, every act of will is a creative movement. All what exists in the world does it because of the collapse of the hyperposition. Nothing else. That's the act of creation according to physics. Well, let me rephrase that to be absolutely 100% clear. That is, the very instance of creation will be created by your intention, nothing else. And this is what we mean by objective reality. It has an objective, it has a purpose. Your thinking is what you see around you, nothing else. And that is reality. But will you, in the very instance of creation, not acknowledge that will, intention is the essence, the deciding factor? You will see another turn of events. These will appear in front of you, but they will not be real in that way. Real meaning they will be haphazardous, arbitrary, non-controlled, non-desired. They will look like instances of pure chance. And this is what chance is. We know chance doesn't exist, but chance is the feeling that you put into yourself when you started to believe in classical physics. But the important thing, and this is the third thing, you chose somewhere to believe this. You shut the door to reality, you walked into the cave of ideals. You became a brain in the vat at some instance, voluntarily. Albeit could have happened so early on in childhood, and it most probably did, that you weren't even conscious of it. You start walking the walk, you start following the pace. Everybody is walking in the same pace. And this is part and parcel of the illusion of classical physics. We are all disturbed in some way. And classical physics is that disturbance. And that's one of the reasons, I would say, this could be 3A, that it is usually negative. Like in the example of my friend. I was wishing for something positive, and out of that something negative came. That was one of the aspects. And it's very common if you live in a chancy world, that you will perceive everything as goalless. I might mention some names: Carl Sagan, Steven Weinberg, Stephen Hawking even. They all perceive the world to be utterly made by chance and meaningless. Carl Sagan even stated that you should acknowledge the fact that the world is meaningless and that you have no purpose of being here. Well, if you start saying that, there won't be any purpose to anything, not even going to the toilet, the lavatory, or whatever. All intention will disappear. While, albeit few people have driven the case so far. And we have an example. We have Jacques Monod, the Nobel Prize winner in the 60s, even wrote a book about these things. I can highly recommend it. If you recognize anything that he wrote as reliable or making sense, it might be like me, then that you have some classical physical tendencies. We all have. Jacques Monod, however, should not be read a dark and gloomy day. Just reading about it will situate you into a very, very dark and hopeless place. But that is actually what chance is hopelessness. Thinking that the world is made by chance is depression. It's the same thing. Goes hand in hand. And as we know, Ian McGilchrist pointed that out through his incredibly exhaustive, extensive and comprehensive work, checking out all these thousands of sources, thousands of experimentations, research, that depression is more or less a new thing. It started with boredom in the 18th century. By already the late part of that century, people starting to being obviously depressed. Or that depressed in a new way. Everything for these people were depressing, and it started often with that everything is chance. Nothing has an intention. Nothing has, as Werther would have said, eine Richtung. I could give another example of this. It was a movie, maybe late 90s, early 20th century and 21st century, somewhere there. And I think his name was Chaos. I'm not completely sure. They are out in space, and one of the characters says, and he's from hell, that hell is chaos. And he had the point there. It was a very modern way of explaining hell, but he has a point. Chaos is hell, and not chaos in the sense of case theory, but chaos in the sense of being completely arbitrary, which reality doesn't cover for. There's not such a thing as chaos in that sense. But you can have sort of a perception of everything being chance. Dark perception. An emotional one. And an emotional one that always, without any exception, goes with a posture. To that rule, there's no exception. You have to be corporally different. You have to be in an attitude to perceive the world classically, physically. There's no doubt about that, because it is something, in a way, deeply subjective in the negative sense. But it's more like I'm shutting out reality I'm shutting out the intention I do perceive, the body perceive, the intention we do have in language, because language as we use it does have intention. Everything we do has intention. So we need to shut that out. We have always been quantum physical, but it's somewhere in our minds an infection started to spread after Newton. And that infection stops us from seeing reality. So, as I mentioned before, one of our purposes with this project is to be like a lighthouse. We need to embody the liberations ourselves. That's very important. We cannot go around and criticize classical physics only. That's just the start. We start with the paradoxes. But then we go further. We show what is to be expected when you enter reality again, when you go to quantum physics. Well, most of the things you will perceive is like reinforcement what you always know, that there is a real reality, that there is a purpose, and there is a stability, and there is safety, and so forth. I will make that another lecture. But let me round off number 3 here with mentioning Federer, the tennis player. There is no chance whatsoever that he, in the Wimbledon Cup, believed that he doesn't create reality. Without any doubt in his mind, in his body, he would not have won. There's no chance of that. All good sports professionals believe they create the world. Any disbelief, any doubt will have a direct effect. It's a little bit like shooting. We have a special sports in Sweden called skidskytte. I have no idea what it is in English, but you ski for a long time and then you have to shoot. It's a horrible, horrible thing to do. You have a high pulse, you're already excited, and then you have to shoot, which needs you to calm down instantly, which is impossible. But they still succeed. But even the slightest little doubt when shooting, taking out the gun from the back, put it on your shoulder, reaching the trigger, and you don't even have time to accurately zoom or anything like that. You just have to shoot directly. Any doubt will have an effect there. We know that. So classical physics destroys reality, destroys intention. And it's this destruction that is classical physics, nothing else. It's not a picture of reality. It cannot be that because it's left reality. It's a doing, and that's a completely different thing. It's something you do. It has a practical purpose, which also is an important aspect of reality. Yeah, I clearly remember the movie now. I think one of the lead characters was this Australian actor who also was the Elf King in Lord of the Rings. He was the chaos devil. And the hell, not with fire, not with warm sulfur. It was a more modern picture of hell. So it starts with deciding thinking in Federer's case, and then you have what comes after. What comes after is another perspective. Then the deed is done, then it's finished. So it's also something wrong with the classical physical viewpoint. It starts with something that has already happened. It's after, in this new sense I'm trying to infer from the Bono, and I use the term Baval, I will remember, could be corrected. And it's explicit. You explain it in some way, you observe it in a different way. Now it's been decided, now you see it, and this is how you perceived reality until quantum physics. Everything was determined somehow. What happens is, what would be if a classical physical person would have participated in the Wimbledon game? Well, he would somewhere start in the wrong end. He would say something is already finished by the time it was finished. That could be like perceiving the ball to be material before it was decided to be material, deciding its position before position was decided, and that thinking, which is extra and comes in a moment of time that's also completely chancely. It's arbitrary. And most likely it would disturb the action. It's not thinking in the normal way. It's a disturbing thought, an intrusive thought we mentioned before. You have a thinking process, it can be creative, it can give you clues, it has intention, it has joy and all that other stuff. But this is more like an intrusive thought. It solidifies you. And a tennis trainer would say you are out of beat, you're not in the rhythm. And that's something you can see explicitly, but foremost you perceive it, not being in the flow. And not being in the flow is something that always is the case if you persistently uphold the erroneous idea of classical physics. And you get used to this condition. You get conditioned to feel that, in lieu of using a Skinnerian term. Classical physics is putting on the subjective an extra distortion to the equation. It's something extra, it doesn't belong into the equation. It could be termed a piece of thinking, and that's how it usually comes to us. And I try to move the billiard ball with a cue, I would perceive it to be thought coming up, self-generated thought in my head usually. That's how I perceive it. But that's not completely correct. I will have thinking when I shoot the ball, even if I am in the flow. But it's this thought that sort of sticks up. It doesn't belong to the context. And that makes me be extra conscious of that thought. And that gives the perception that it is just thinking. It's not. There's no solution to playing billiards or anything else to stop thinking. It's not thinking as such that's wrong. It's this distortion of the rhythm. It doesn't come in a good rhythm. It's like you're dancing in one pace and the other one that you're supposed to lead is dancing in another pace. And I think that could be very, very important, because you often hear the advice when you're doing sports or games: don't think. Well, you should actually think a lot, but that should be directed thinking. And because we don't usually perceive directed thinking, we do it, something embodied, directed, and when everything is flowing, you don't have a clear perception of it. It's like in the coverage, like Heidegger would say, it doesn't come into the clearance because until something is not working. You don't think about the bike until something breaks in it. And this is what this thought does. Exactly. It breaks something. Or it is what is broken. That's why you perceive it. Stop thinking is a very, very crude advice. And it's not really accurate. My fourth part here is that in classical physics you will be interfering with reality, where you put something that can only be realized afterwards and in many different ways, because the explicit is possible in so many different ways, and you try to put that like an intrusive thought before the event, which is impossible, but you try to anyway before the event of the collapse of the superposition. And this will have an effect. Actually, this will have an effect, because every thought has an effect. But it makes things arbitrary. And lo and behold, here you have classical physics as perception. Something that is arbitrary, non-guided, hopeless. Because there is emotions connected to classical physics as well. Negative emotions. And those are the effects of the lack of intention. Everything in this world has an intention. Lack of intention is a negative thought. You will come into a state that is a bit more dreamlike. It will also be a tad more confused. The fifth part here, sorry to make it this bit dense today, but I think this needs to be stated, because this would be like a platform to go to the next level, what the quantum physics actually provide, the sustenance, a good part. Fifth is, we know today, and that was one of the discoveries in 20s by the quantum physicist, that KLF, or classical physics, or CLF, that it would be in English, is self-proving. It's a circular argument that cannot be disproven. Once you're in the loop, it's very hard to have any disapproval. We mentioned that before. You need to have the paradox until you start really wanting to think differently. Otherwise, you will accept all the horrors of the world as long it's true and real. And I think that's a good point, especially when we people are so, again, using a Skinnerian term, accustomed, maybe is better term than betingad, conditioned. We're so accustomed to have grievances around us that we think actually in our really, really bad state, diffuse state, confused state, that reality is what we perceive as being bad. Something has to be bad to be reality. Who was that who said that? That reality is what makes me throw up? Was it Camus? I think that's certain. And that's also one of the reasons. A couple of years ago, one of my lectures I held, and somebody commented that take away that joint, don't smoke it anymore, because what you're saying is not reality. Reality has to be something bad a priori. Well, I'm really happy with the positive things of quantum physics, but we need to understand it's a bit more than that. Reality is neutral, but that's the positive. This is not a counterpart to being bad. Intention is positive in itself, but that doesn't go to say that reality has a positive tendency. It's that intention, without intention, nothing is real. It's a bit more than that, actually. Of course, joy and happiness come directly from that. And it could also be better to think about joy and happiness as not being opposite to negative feelings. Negative feelings is something maybe it should never be felt, because they are classically physical. Of course, you still will have emotions in quantum physics, but that will be with a purpose. It won't make you passive. It won't make you like the young Werther in Goethe or something like that. It won't put you in a Kafkaesque situation without a purpose, in the hands of other powers, usually evil, menacing, horrible, dark. I mean, just speaking about classical physics makes the dark skies disappear here, getting warmer. We need to, of course, distinguish this part of our own reality to have like a stepping stone to go further. But as I said in fifth, KLF is self-proving. It doesn't take any sustenance from the outside. It doesn't rely on observation. You can always prove something that you already said will exist. And that's why this distinction, which is not temporal in the Newtonian way, but this distinction about before and after is so important to understand and to train on, to perceive. But classical physics takes its stand in what has already happened and made that reality. So that we are actually telling the reality what to be before it's even happened. And that's also, of course, what is taking place in the imagined conversation between Einstein and Bohr, where Einstein says, God does not play dice? And that is answered in detail by Bohr, who says, don't tell God what to do. And I think that's the same thing. Einstein got it in the wrong order. What he thought was order, what he saw in after the fact. But order must be there already before. There you need the intention to have an order. Otherwise, what you say is what already happened, and that's self-proved. You're just stating a fact. It's a little bit like saying, I'm standing on the ground, and I can prove it. Well, it's circular. It's a tautology in its worst case scenario, because it cannot be disproven for obvious reason. It's not falsifiable, and therefore it's not even wrong. It's a piece of nonsense. And this is also something we can see in the heart. We will have a shut out heart, a stern heart, if we continue with classical physics. This heart is not open, it's not feeling, it's hardened. And the body, which is the heart, will only work as good as the intention we put into reality. Strong, willful intentions will make good movements. Like in Federer's case, I am creator, or IAC for short, makes the wave work. The wave must be working. We are a wave in a regard, in an aspect. We are constantly going somewhere, even if we're standing still like I am doing more or less now. And this wave is the working of a good, strong, directed manner of an intention. And intentions are not an external part of the body's tensegrity. The intention is visible. It's doing something. It's needed to make the whole system work. There is an intention. There is a direction in any tensegrity system. This is this direction that makes the tensegrity structure so strong. And that goes to explain the strength in tensegrity structures, because there is a direction. And that direction will get even stronger with forces, because those forces are directed. And you need less building materials. And of course our body is a tensegrity structure as well, because it's the best structure. What else would it be? So we need to be absolutely, affirmatively 100% sure what we're doing. And then our movements will be coordinated, directed in a sound way. And when we have this deciding power, we have the force. It's a little bit like Star Wars. May the force be with you. Well, there is a force in a tensegrity structure, and when I have the intention, what I'm doing, and the intention to be curious about what's around me, you need to be attentively curious, interested. And you will be it when you are balanced, because look at the little child. It has intentions all the time, and it moves in a joyous way. All children does, and so should we. It's like part of the structure. You don't see children sitting, well, at least not in a very young age, looking out the window and just observing reality. That just won't happen. I can't even do it yet. We need this directing force all the time, in our bodies and in our thinking. I'd say that misuse is CLF, classical physics. And this is the underlying erroneous assumption that we need to counteract gravity somehow, because our bodies feel heavy. They are like we are, our bodies are different parts. The arms go that way, legs go this way, and we're not a whole, we're not a gestalt. And of course, that's one of the stronger foundations of classical physics. There is no intention there. And if there is an intention, that's in the level below in the hierarchy. First comes empty space, then comes empty time. And somewhere inside that constructed system you have an intention, a very small intention. And it makes me move from position in X, Y, Z to another position in X, Y, Z. And in between that there's a timeline, linear time. And in that there could be a little intention, but everything is determined otherwise. Not so. Nothing can be determined until afterwards. When the deed is done, you just have to wait and see until Federer finishes the set. You can wait, but Federer doesn't wait. He plays. He is in the action, and that's the whole difference. And of course, that has a lot of things to do with his success, enormous success, would I mention. Once again, I'm so happy with this example from dear old Penrose. It has really helped me, and I think this is enough for this time. I'll go back to the benefit of quantum physics in the next episode. And I thank you. Clouds of classical physics has disappeared from our view, and the sky is opening up, and it's slowly getting warmer again. And I thank you all good folks for listening. Have a fun day. Bye bye.